So in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about graphing. We're going to talk about x and y intercepts, slopes, and lines. So first question here, it says estimate the x and y intercepts. If you think about the word intercept, that means to cross. So x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. Where your line crosses the x-axis. And the y-intercept is where your line crosses y-axis. So my x-intercept will be where my line that I'm drawing is crossing the x-axis. That's about here. If you see, the x value is -2, the y value is 0. And remember, we always write an order pair as x comma y. So I write the x value first and then the y value. So the x-intercept will be -2, 0. The y-intercept, it's where it crosses my y-axis. Well, my y-axis is going up and down here. It's here. And if you graph that point, I don't go anywhere on my x values. So the x value is 0 and the y value is -1. So my y-intercept will be 0, -1. Let's look at a different question. Let's look at the slope of a line. So the definition of the slope of a line is my change in my y value divided by my change in my x. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a y value and subtracting. If I have 2 points, I'm subtracting the second y value minus the first y value and dividing it by the second x value minus the first x value. So if you can find 2 points on this graph, I'm going to do the intercepts. I noticed I have a point here of 0 for x, 1 for y, and a point here for 3 for x, 0 for y. So I have 2 points and I can plug them into this formula. Whatever you label as y2, you have to label that point as x2. So I'm going to let this be y2 and this x2, and this y1 and this x1. So if I plug it into this formula, y2 is 0, y1 is 1, x2 is 3, x1 is 0. So I get -1 over 3, and that's my slope. Another way you can do slope, we call slope the rise over the run. And it's not always going to rise, sometimes it's going to fall. So I'm going to start with my y-axis. I'm going to start on my point crossing my y-axis, or you can pick any point on the line. I see I have a point here. I could use that point. But I'm going to start one that I can clearly see. So I'm going to use my y-intercept. And I'm going to go up or down, depending on the way the graph is going, and then I'm always going to go to the right. If I go up and to the right, then it's a positive slope. If I go down and to the right, it's a negative slope. So I see I need to go down 1 and to the right 3 to get to my next point. So I went down 1, so that's a -1, and I went to the right 3, which is +3. So that's going to be my slope. Let's see if we have another example here. Let's do this one up here, because this one's always a tricky one for most people. Let's do it the way with points here. This point is 0, 1. This point here would be 3, 1. So I'm going to call this x1 and x2, or y2, y1, sorry, and this x2 and y2. So remember, my slope we represent with the letter m is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I would memorize this and know it, especially for later classes that you may have to take. So y2 is 1 minus y1 is 1, x2 is 3, and x1 is 0. So I get 0 over 3, and 0 divided by anything is 0. So my slope here would be a 0 slope. When they talk about positive, negative, undefined, a positive slope, you would be rising from left to right. So this is a positive slope. A negative slope, as we saw down here, will be falling from left to right. We always want to read graphs left to right here. So this will be a negative slope. and the undefined slope will go up and down because we would change in our y, so we would have some value for our change in y, but we would not change in x. X would always be the same. So since x would always be the same, when we subtract two x values, we get a 0. And whenever we get a 0 in the denominator, it's an undefined statement. Let's look at this one. Find the slope of the line, of this line here. So they got the point 10. It's actually this one because x is 10. So that's this point. 10, 256. So I'm going to call that x1 and y1. And 20 and 285. So I'm going to call this x2 and y2. So remember, my slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So it gives me 285 minus 256 over 20 minus 10, which is going to give us 29 over 10, and so that's my slope. That should be my slope. Now interpret the slope, the population. Well, since the slope is positive, my population should increase at a rate of 20, and the slope